Okay, welcome back to the Woven Energy Podcast with me, Joseph Sikora, and Damon Smith. We're here to talk about shamanism from the ground up yet again, and this is a hotly anticipated episode. Been trying to record this for a while, haven't we, Damon? But it's going to be all about psychedelic aids, psychedelic substances, drugs, or catalysts, as we like to call them on the Woven Energy Podcast. We've talked about these a few times on the podcast, but we haven't really dedicated much time to them. Probably because of our particular outlook on them, but I'm hoping to do a bit of a deep dive with them today with Damon, try and really get to grips with what our stance on them is, and my personal experiences as well, which I kind of want to throw into the mix and talk about a bit. So, Damon, do you want to recap a little bit about the approach you have towards psychedelic aids or psychedelic substances?
I have no approach whatsoever, so there's a recap. I don't use the term. It's, to me, those words are all part of the miasma, and they basically if I use those words, especially psychedelic aids, for instance, that term, you know that feeling when you scrape your nails down a blackboard. The term, you know, because I've been involved in shamanism for a long time, and certain things are just the general public's understanding of this stuff is wrong-headed in just such a huge way that I feel a bit depressed, frankly, whenever the subject comes up.
Well, it's that age-old thing, you know. Whenever we sit down and talk about stuff, we always get into a funny thing.
And as you know,
language.
it's not a subject that thrills me. Though it is a subject, I know quite a lot about it, but it's a subject that does seem to be very, very appealing to a lot of people who first approach shamanism. It seems to be one of the things about it that attracts them. And I think, as I've said before many times, first of all, you know, they are catalysts, as I like to call them, to people who are high-level, intermediate, stroke advanced shamans, can be useful in certain very specialized circumstances. So I'm not saying that they have no use in shamanism whatsoever. What I'm saying is they are an absolutely dreadful starting point if you are approaching shamanism. That's my view on them. And I think I used the analogy of first aid with a scalpel, didn't I? A scalpel is a very, very useful tool in the hands of a surgeon. But it's a dreadful first aid tool in somebody who's been to a 2-hour-long self-defense class. A 2-hour-long first aid class. Or indeed self-defense class.
Well, let's just take a little zoom out here, because I think we are in 100% agreement when it comes to shamanic technique and psychedelic aids, you know.
Yeah.
But do you not think there's some value in them when it comes to animism? Because there's a homogeneity there between people who take them, and they come out quite often better people. There's more appreciation for nature, you know, all the cliche crap that you hear about. But, you know, it takes that experience to take that cliche crap that you might think is cliche crap and actually make sense of it and go, well, actually, there's a point there. There's something there.
Sure, but, okay, well, two things. One is, that is true. They do tend to have that effect on people, but there are reasons why, and they're not the greatest reasons. And they have nothing to do with the legitimate use of catalysts within shamanism. And also, my second observation on that is that nature by itself can have that overwhelming positive experience, talking about animism, without any help at all. And I think that one of the things that's quite important to understand is what they do to you and why they do it. I think, you know, take Arun Mug, which is like a Mongolian term for catalyst mushrooms used as catalysts.
So when you're talking here, you're talking about them all together, what they do.
Well, all of the fungal, a lot of the fungal and plant-based hallucinogens are really, really closely related to each other. I think in terms of the chemistry, I think we mentioned it before, they all do pretty much the same thing. Stuff like mescaline, DMT, psilocybin, they all do the same sort of thing. And the reason why they do it is moderately well understood. It's in biology, it's a moderately well understood evolutionary pathway that's given rise to this. And what they do is they protect the mushrooms or the fungi from predation, specifically mostly by insects, but also by humans and other animals. You've got to remember that what a mushroom is it's a reproductive body. Its spores are going to produce the next generation of mushrooms, and it doesn't want to be eaten. It really doesn't want to be eaten. And one of the things it could do, if you take, you could create some kind of complex deadly toxin, something like ricin, and you could just kill outright anything that tries to eat you. And there are plants that do that, but the production of complex protein-based toxins like that is a huge overhead for the plant. It costs a lot of energy and a lot of work to produce those things, and they are incredibly complex molecules compared to psilocybin, DMT, mescaline, which are incredibly simple molecules. They are based on amino acids, particularly tryptophan, that every living thing on the planet is producing in reasonably large quantity anyway, as for other parts of the metabolism. And they're just slight tweaks of those things. They're incredibly cheap to produce. And the reason that is because neurotransmitters like serotonin, they need to be cheap to produce. Your body uses an awful lot of them. And metabolically, if they were complicated and expensive to produce, your nervous system would run out of fuel, basically run out of neurotransmitters pretty quickly. So they're very, very easy molecules to mimic. Now, one of the things you could do is you want to go on Google Images, do a search on serotonin and get a picture of the molecule up. I don't mean do it now. You can go to it's like homework, and then go away and do a search on psilocybin, DMT, or mescaline, and look at just how similar looking those molecules are and how small they are. For organic molecules, probably where most organic molecules are huge. These things are relatively simple. And if you are a fungus, say, and you want to stop insects or indeed humans from eating you, one of the things you can do is divert their attention. Rather than creating some complex toxin to wipe them out, you just simply divert their attention by giving them hallucinations. Another thing that these drugs do is they also act as appetite suppressants. And so you divert their attention by giving them a positive experience.
This is certainly not addictive, that's for sure.
This is the interesting thing about it. It's a distraction. These things work in exactly the same way that camouflage works. They distract the predator. If you want to eat a mushroom, you're the predator, right? You can't say you're a herbivore either because the mushrooms aren't plants. The fungivore wants to eat the mushroom, and you start to eat them, but then you get distracted. You have this amazing experience. You feel very positive. And one of the things that people are always trying to tell me is what a positive experience they've had when they use these things in a recreational sense. It makes them feel closer to nature. It makes them feel more part of the universe, and it makes them feel good. And then the brain, the limbic system in the brain, the way that it functions, it controls memory, and it generally associates positivity, which is produced by serotonin. And it's not the kind of euphoria that dopamine produces in the body, but serotonin does create feelings of positivity and well-being. And remember, serotonin is what a lot of these things are mimicking. And so your limbic system, just because of the way it naturally works, when you go through experiences in your life that make you feel positive, you tend to remember that stuff and you attribute significance on it. You attach significance to those positive experiences because in your natural state, that positivity is usually caused by something that happened during that experience, and your memory remembers it so that hopefully you can recreate those circumstances again.
Are you making a distinction between what you might call recreational use and, let's quote unquote this, trying to further your understanding of shamanism? Because from my perspective, I've had I approach it very clearly in two ways, and this is partly or mainly down to you. One is, yes, recreational, we're having a laugh, and it is what it is, and I put it in a box and I go, let's just do that, and then not read anything into it. It's done. But then there's other experiences where I've gone, no, I'm going to take these and I'm going to go after a certain technique. I'm going to go after practicing it, and
sure.
there's something about them that when you're in the throes of that experience, helps you piece together an understanding of the technique.
It can
in
do.
a very experiential way. Well,
it can do if you're on top of the technique. That's the key point. If you're not on top of the technique, it can just make you think that that's happening. And there's a big distinction. So I'm not making the recreational, non-recreational distinction. What I'm making is a three-way distinction. There's recreational use, there's true shamanic use, which incidentally doesn't produce positivity, feelings of positivity. It doesn't produce anything like euphoria. A shaman's an experienced shaman. When somebody is asking an experienced shaman about these things and saying, I know from my own experience that when I tried it, it made me feel this and it made me feel that, and I learned about nature and I learned about the world, and it was a very positive experience for me. The words positive experience are the indicator that what was going on was not shamanism. Because the use of catalysts, a shaman would say it's a positive experience, so what? What's that got to do with anything? It's completely irrelevant. Shamanic technique is directed. If you can use any kind of component to your shamanic technique that supports the end goal and the purpose of that shamanic technique, then that's fine, as long as you're on top of the technique and you're able to remain focused on the purpose of the technique. Remember, there's no such thing as purposeless shamanic technique. There's only technique with a purpose. It's practical. It has an outcome. And here's a thought. Here's another way to look at it. If I say to you that you can have an absolutely dreadful experience using naturally occurring compounds within nature and naturally occurring factors within nature, catalysts. And remember that also people focus in on the ones that tend to make them feel good. You know, the mescalines, the psilocybin, the DMT, all that kind of stuff.
Oh, aye, there's others.
The opiates, yes.
Iboga.
They're
Iboga
a tiny
loops,
fraction of the all-over thing. But my point is, say you use something else and it makes you feel absolutely dreadful. It makes you ill for a week. But if the objective of your shamanic technique has been met, if the purpose has been met, then that, in shamanic terms, even though you were dreadful and ill for a week, you felt dreadful and you were ill for a week, that's a positive outcome as far as a shaman's concerned. If the objective of your shamanic technique is not met, it doesn't matter how good you feel about it, what you think you learned in the experience, you have failed in your shamanic technique. Because shamanic technique is always directed, it always has a purpose. And this is why I feel...
What about the learning stages up to that point?
Yes,
though?
This is the point. The learning point.
Steps
the
along
learning
the way.
point. The use of the catalyst is there for when you have learned. There is nothing to be learned from it. They act as catalysts for the technique that you have learned. They are not part of the technique. They're kind of facilitator, a catalyst, just like a catalyst in chemistry. But my point is, you do not learn anything. You might think you do, but you do not learn anything from the catalysts themselves. You learn from the shamanic technique, which, as you recall, is all about the shaman picking up on those subtle cues within nature. And entering a non-ordinary state of consciousness. Now, can these things put you quickly into a non-ordinary state of consciousness? Absolutely they can. But there's more, as we know, there's more to the non-ordinary state of consciousness than just that. You have to have several factors in place when you enter the non-ordinary state of consciousness in order to be able to operate as a shaman, in order to be able to pursue that objective. That is Bat, Toshelteen, and Guchach. None of those things are automatically present in the shamanic state. They have to be built as part of the shaman's learning. For us as civilized human beings, it may be different in hunter-gatherer societies, for instance, people who live very close to nature day to day, but we have to work on those things. The key point is that there is titanic miasma inside us, titanic. And when we enter that state, that non-ordinary state of consciousness, that miasma is amplified. And we naturally, because we naturally have a barrier against it, and we have two, if you like, this is a gross simplification, but we have two barriers inside ourselves, inside our spirit. One is the barrier between the shaman and nature, and the other is the barrier between the shaman and the miasma, the shaman and delusion, the shaman and his imagination, the shaman and his positive experience, his irrelevant positive experience. Those two barriers, to have effective shamanic technique, one of them has to stay up, and the other one has to come down. The issue with inexperienced people using these catalysts is they rip down both of those barriers. They just tear them both down, and so the shaman needs dedication in order to hold up the barrier that stands between himself, between his chelicity, which, remember, chelicity is the state in which the shaman's has the capability to distinguish between delusion and reality. If he's got a substance or something inside his body trying to tear that wall down, then he has to put immense effort into keeping that wall up. And that's where Bat is so key. Of the three components, Bat is so key if you're going to use these kind of catalysts. As I've said many times, your Bat has to be titanic to use them effectively. Because one of the things there, for instance, this whole positivity thing, I feel that it was a great experience. I feel that it's wonderful. All I can say, I feel I've learned things. I feel I've come closer to nature. If you feel that, 9 times out of 10, your Bat came down, that wall came down, and it wasn't nature speaking, it was the miasma. And this is kind of my worry. So if I think I said on our very, very first episode, shamans are super tough. This is we've come full circle here. We've now reached a point where we can talk about that again. They have to be tough in terms of, the focus and the dedication and the drive, and to realize the objective of the technique, to direct the technique to its purpose. That it's very, very easy, even without these catalysts, it's very, very easy to be, as you know, to be distracted from that purpose. Use of the catalyst makes it way easier to be distracted from that purpose. You could be distracted from just simply by the fact that, wow, this is a positive experience. I feel one part of nature. Yeah.
But you see,
the point is, so what? That has nothing to do with shamanism. I'm very happy for you. That's my feeling. But it's got nothing to do with shamanism. The purpose of the technique is the purpose of the technique.
My experience is opposite to that. So my experience, well, depending on my approach, but my experience by and large is that it makes it far easier to hone in and focus on one thing. So let's say, I hate using the word, and I know you hate the word, Damon, so don't hold me up on it. trance, puts you in a funny state of trance.
Yeah.
And so when I go, right, I'm now going to do a session and practice a certain technique, or try and just get a deeper familiarity with that technique, I find it puts me into a focused state where I find it easier to be in that technique, if that makes sense, rather than get distracted by all these wonderful things. That is almost feels irrelevant and kind of doesn't really happen.
Sure.
The very simplistic example of that is just the rhythm again, and I bang on about it all the time, but just the rhythm. If you simply put yourself into a rhythm, like even just bang a drum or just jump up and down or put yourself into a side-to-side rhythm, it's far easier to lock into something there on these things than without these things. So maybe you could shed a bit of light onto that.
Well, I don't.
If that makes any sense.
It does make what you're saying makes sense, but I don't agree with it. That's the problem, Joe.
Yeah,
I think it only makes
please,
it.
Please.
I only think it makes it seem easier.
Yeah.
So I agree. It seems easier.
I'm here to learn as well. Rip it apart, please.
I'm not ripping it apart. My point is that the criteria is the technique working or not. Yeah, it's not are you learning the technique. If you are using these things to learn the technique, then you're wasting your time. They are there. The way that they're used. Remember, they're toxins. Yeah, they work the same as any other toxin. They are very cheap to produce toxins, and I think, as I've hinted at, other toxins that have negative effects on your body that make you feel dreadful can be used in exactly the same way. And so my point is that in both cases, the fact that they make you feel good or positive, the fact that they make you feel like you're learning something, they make you feel like you're becoming closer to nature, or they're making you feel sick, they're making you feel like you want to die, you're making you feel like you wish you were dead. All of those things, positive and negative, are all irrelevant to their use. Yeah. Their use is there to force you into a non-ordinary state of consciousness quickly. This is the legitimate use. They can put you deeply into a state of a non-ordinary state of consciousness very, very quickly, and that is their legitimate use. They do not teach you anything. They don't help you learn anything from nature. They simply put you into that non-ordinary state of consciousness. Now, if you remember when we talked about the sort of 7 steps in becoming a shaman, the Bhaktamsasa Chalicity, as we call it, they don't help with that at all. Nothing at all. Amska.
Chalicity, they don't help.
Don't help with that.
Yeah. Okay. Got you.
The Amska, they don't help with that at all. Although they may, certainly in terms of Amska technique, they may feel like they're helping because you've had a positive experience. You felt like you were dissolving into nature. The point at the Amska level is you're much more likely to be honest and true about that if you have that sense without them. Do you follow what I mean? The dance, Bobichig, again, they have no positive effect on that level either. That's about coming to... I am coming to one where they do have an effect, yeah? That's about coming to understanding of the energy that's transforming inside a human being and how it starts to interact with the energy or the change that's going on inside the environment, inside the world, or around a human being. Then we have Guruch, the weave. This is where that crossover is the shamans start to learn in the crossover between the energy that's produced by the level 3 technique. You know, it doesn't have to be dance, but to me it's always dance because that's what I do. The weave. They have no positive effect there whatsoever. It's the next level. It's level 5. It's the modoch. This is where they help. The weave... Now, this is really, really, you know, as we said before, these levels get harder and harder to put into words as you go up the stack. Anyway, the modoch is about that weave, the interaction between the change going on with the environment and the change going on within the shaman, that interweave has a repercussions. It has something that is created out of it. And sometimes we call it a vessel. It's an absolute dreadful word. So I just, I think, as I've said before, I prefer to use the Mongol word modok, because it doesn't really mean vessel, and it doesn't really mean anything really. It has no there's no English meaning for that word. It's the thing that arises out of the shaman's experience of interacting with nature. The change within the shaman interacting with the change within nature. This is the level where catalysts can help, because the thing that emerges from the weave, so we're talking about coming out of level 4 and we're going into level 5. So we're coming out of, the weave is what we called Guru. It's what we called it, the Woven Energy Podcast. We named it after level 4, right? So we're going at level 5. To reach the technique, level 6 technique, to reach the Ailal, and not do it in an imaginary way, but to do it for real, you have a sense of slipping onto that vessel. And this is incredibly difficult. It's probably the hardest thing to learn in the whole of shamanism. The modok is this. You don't create the vessel arises. But then your spirit kind of slips onto that vessel. And there's lots of different ways that you can sort of experience that. But the catalysts at this level can help. They work like a lubricant. So if you imagine this, if you want to think of it in terms of physical objects, it's not physical, and it certainly has it's nothing that happens in any kind of space. But if you imagine you have a sort of not very steep slope, a downward slope. It's not very steep. And you have a wooden block at the top of that slope. And then at the bottom of that slope is a little car. That's a figurative representation of the Ailal. You push that block. It wants to run down the slope, but there's kind of a friction there. But what you could do is take some grease or lubricant and you could rub it on the slope. And then when you give the block a little nudge, it slides down much more easily, slides down the slope much more easily. And the experience of modok is nothing like that, but the action of the catalysts at level 5 technique is exactly that. They're a lubricant that enables the shaman to slip onto the vessel in order to then proceed to the Ailal, the level 6 technique, which it's not the only level 6 technique, but we characterize as the journey, the spirit journey. And so, to me, that is their legitimate use within shamanism.
And I imagine the job of the shaman, the discipline, the bat, all throughout those stages would be to wholeheartedly dismiss everything about the experience, quote unquote, of the
Exactly.
of the psychedelic, and just use that one small aspect of it to be able to
And so you can now imagine, if you use that analogy, and what you're interested in is the block reaching the car. That's your purpose. You want we're talking about child's toy car and a child's block and that kind of thing, and maybe a wooden plank as a ramp. The purpose of the technique is for that block to get to the car. But then you ask somebody to go and have a go of it and see if they can get the block to the car, and you give them maybe some butter or something to rub on the slope. And then they come back to you and they say, hey man, this butter stuff is amazing. It made me feel so good. Oh, it's wonderful, the butter, and I learned such an amount from the butter. Yeah. This is the experience that's why I feel like I'm scraping my nails down a blackboard. It's like, so what? So what?
This is probably the most thoroughly depressing episode of it.
Well, I did warn you, man.
In a good way.
Like I say, I've described what I believe to be the main legitimate use as a catalyst. You can see why I call it a catalyst. It enables something to go from one place to another place. But it's an enabler. It's not the purpose. It's not something you learn anything from. And in a way, it's a distraction, because the point of the thing is to get the block to the toy car. That's the purpose. And it doesn't matter whether butter makes you feel great and euphoric, or whether it makes you feel like you're one with nature, or if it makes you sick. It doesn't make any difference. That's its purpose, is to get the block, which is effectively your spirit, to the car. which is the ILAL, or the ILAL is an example of level 6.
So
technique,
what would you can have whole let's take psilocybin for instance. You can have a completely different quote unquote experience on a handful of, let's say, libs, up to a bucketful. So for a legitimate use of a shaman with plenty of experience who would be using them for that purpose, would it make sense at all for him or her to take a ridiculous amount versus a small amount, or is there any relevance to the shaman for that? Or
well, first of all, you can't control. I mean, there are psilocybin's a really good example because there are literally hundreds of different species of mushrooms that have it in them, that produce it. And what's very interesting is, in biological terms, is that a lot of those mushrooms, although they're all fungi, a lot of them aren't very closely related to each other. And there's two different ways of explaining why that is. It's obviously useful to them, but I think one of the explanations I've already mentioned, which is that it's one of the cheapest things you can possibly do to produce a toxin that just doesn't kill the thing that's trying to eat you. It just sends it doolally and distracts it from eating you.
I think that's fascinating. I'd never even occurred to me did that.
There are experiments that have been done that show that, the main things that eat fungi in nature are insects.
It's a biological defense mechanism, is what you're saying, isn't it?
And actually, this stuff, you think it works on us, it's powerful on us. Apparently, it's much more powerful against insects than it is against humans.
Yeah, other mammals. I find it fascinating watching. There's videos of monkeys and tigers and deer eating this stuff. And
exactly. But some biologists have also suggested it's something that's an example of what's known as horizontal gene transfer, that's in fungi, for instance, it's possible for genes to jump, possibly by the action of insects, possible for genes to jump or viruses, from one species to another without those species being particularly closely related to each other. And so this is a relatively modern concept in biology. It's called horizontal gene transfer, and it is very interesting from that point of view. But either way, to me, the purpose is clear. It's a lot, any living creature has a sort of energy economy. It has an energy balance. And if you're going to invest huge amounts of effort and energy in producing these admittedly impressive lethal toxins that some plants and animals are able to produce, then those things need to be incredibly useful to you, yeah? There needs to be some strong evolutionary reason for doing them because you're investing so much energy in it, and that energy that you're putting into the production of these, for instance, complex proteins, is energy that you could be spending doing other things like growing, whereas creating neurotransmitter mimics is one of the cheapest things you can do because you're creating the amino acids anyway. You need those to produce all the proteins in your body. That's how DNA works. It's a kind of template for proteins, which are made out of amino acids. And a few little cheap, inexpensive tweaks on one of those base amino acids, tryptophan, and there you have a serotonin mimic. And then you can just, instead of killing the thing, stone dead with something that costs loads of energy to produce, you can just send it doolally. It forgets about trying to eat you, and it costs you next to nothing to do with in terms of your energy budget, if you like. And therefore, you can invest a lot more of the energy that you would have invested in producing a lethal toxin into growing, creating spores, creating the next generation of your species, if you like. Yeah.
Do you think they try? I remember watching Tribe. I think I recommended it to you once with Bruce Parry.
I've watched it since then. I've watched it.
Yeah, great.
It's very good. It's very good.
But he went to I think it was a tribe in the Amazon or somewhere, and they had him doing DMT. I think he did an Iboga session as well. But what's interesting from what you're saying, the experiences he was coming back with was shapes, triangles, and all sorts of experiences.
Yeah.
So
So
when
what?
we talk about tribes, when we talk about real shamanic technique and even tribes that exist today, relatively untouched by civilization, is there still legitimate use of these substances?
So you've got to remember that the recreational use of these substances and the social use of these substances, because don't forget, a lot of these things can also make people huggy, bondy, and that kind of thing.
I don't personally say anything wrong
social
with it
use.
at all.
They have social use in societies. If there's a legitimate shaman within that society, does he know that? I mean, the other members of the society probably think they're doing their own form of shamanism, and it'll be based in their own sort of micro-miasma within their tribe. Of course, the shaman knows that, but he's not going to spoil their fun, is he? That's not his job, right? So it has nothing to do with his job. And he might want to join in himself, But my point is simple. I'm not saying that they don't have social use. I'm not saying that they don't make you feel good. But my point is, the best way to put it, if you're a true shaman, a legitimate shaman, so let's take a different kind of example. Let's go with Hatamch. Yeah, Hatamch is where the shaman, it means black weed. The shaman takes some kind of plant, rolls it up in a pipe or some other kind of mechanism and smokes it. Yeah. The shaman is putting a complex set of chemicals into his body quite quickly through the lungs. There are various, again, this can be used to lubricate that slope. It can be used for the same purpose, to lubricate that slope. It's the same kind of thing. There's so many substances that can affect you into a non-ordinary state. But what you find is, if you went and did a survey, if you took, for instance, the whole of Asia, Siberia, and Mongolia, the whole of that area of the world, and you did a survey of how many different plants those guys are rolling up and putting in their pipe, you could probably write a book, like an encyclopedia of plant species, which wouldn't be far off all the plant species that exist in the region. Yeah. The point is, any kind of organic chemicals that you put into your body will have an effect of some kind on you. As long as they don't kill you, anything that has an effect on you, that has a non-ordinary effect on you, can act as that lubricant, because in some ways you need to be distracted from yourself to achieve modach. You need to be distracted from yourself, and that's the purpose they serve. They're like they'll just lubricate that transition from stage 4 to stage 6. And as I come back to the legitimate shamanism, it doesn't matter whether that's a positive or negative effect. It doesn't matter whether it makes you feel rubbish or whether it makes you feel good or makes you feel nothing at all. It doesn't matter. If it serves that purpose of distracting you from yourself, then it's done its job. Do you follow what I mean? This is what I don't have. This is what I don't have people coming to me all the time and saying, which I wish I did. Because, if somebody came and says, I tried this plant, I threw up for a week, I felt like I was dying. It was amazing. What a positive experience. I learned so much from the purpose of the shamanic technique. I achieved the purpose. I got it back. Yeah, that's what people don't say to me, and it's this judgment. Part of the miasma is these judgments. It's this judgment between what's positive and what's negative. That is the problem. You have to set all judgments aside.
Things are always a spread. They're always a sliding scale, aren't they? And like we always say, we like to categorize things. So it's easy to fall into the trap, which I know I've read, people talk about. And, they were put here for a purpose. They were put here by God. These are the kind of their gifts from aliens and all.
Yeah,
this
there
stuff.
were to send insects doolally so they don't eat the fungus.
But like you say, they they are spread from things that will kill you all the way through to the other side of it, which are things that will send you doolally and give you these.
Yeah, but the key point is the things that just send you doolally. Yeah, but the key point is the things for biological organisms across the board, the things that send you doolally are a lot cheaper to produce and easier to produce than the things that kill you.
It's their defense mechanism.
Exactly. And why wouldn't you? It doesn't matter if you send if you send the animal doolally, the insect doolally or the human doolally. It's a good word, doolally, isn't it? It's a very shamanic word. If you send them doolally, then you've achieved exactly the same effect as if you killed them stone dead. The only difference is you've saved a huge amount of energy that you can now use on other things like growing.
Because the last thing you're going to do is come back to have another taste of that, isn't it? Once you've been through it, especially if you've accidentally had a stomach full.
Yeah, and this is why
coming back for more.
This is why the truly deadly animals, they're famous. The poison arrow tree frog, and the truly deadly plants, various snakes that have deadly venom. They're the exception rather than the rule. More snakes are not deadly than the snakes that are deadly because there's an overhead of being a deadly snake. And, if you're a snake and you don't need to be deadly to succeed in your life, then rather than spending energy making these amazing, impressive toxins, why not just spend energy doing the other things that snakes do, eating things and stuff, and just generally having a good snaky time.
People like to put a positive spin on them because they have such a positive effect on you.
Yeah, for sure. But then you got to, if you're going to go down that line, then you got to include alcohol as well.
Yeah.
And then you got to. I feel sometimes it's probably bad, but some nice kinds of food, some nice cheese. I get, you sorry for that? Is this my shamanic cheese?
Well, my point was that if you can take a step back from being distracted by the fact that they do give you a positive experience and view them purely from a biological point of view, that there is a spread to these things. They can kill you or they can give you a positive experience, and every single thing in between. Some can make you ill for a week, but you will recover, etc., etc.
Yeah.
That's why they're there. They're not there for you to go on a shamanic journey. They're there purely from a natural nature, biological, evolutionary point of view. That's the defense mechanism.
A lot of them
I found that fascinating. I never thought about it that way. But it makes total sense, and it's another example of how I like our conversations, Dem, because it gives it a dose of pragmatism.
Sure.
There's the pragmatism there, which is always good, especially when we talk about these things.
Some people, is probably going to say, I'll head this one off. Somebody's going to say, Damon, your hero, Terence McKenna, thinks there's a parallel evolution going on with humans. So I'm not disagreeing with him, am I? I'm saying there was parallel evolution going on. I'm just giving an explanation as to why. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, the guy was amazing, Terence McKenna, in lots and lots of ways. But
the point I'm making is, I'm not disagreeing with him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he does. He has said some things which directly contradict what you say. Surely, he recommends people. He recommends people lock themselves in a dark room and take, a heroic dose of mushrooms and go away with the fairies. That's what he recommends. But it's like
maybe. I don't remember that, but anyway.
I've listened to a lot of Terence McKenna. He said that plenty of times. That's one of his. That's one of his big things. He says, lock yourself in a dark room. It has to be a dark room, and you need to take 5 grams of psilocybin mushrooms and basically enter the yonder realm. So
the dark room, again, Mongolian shamans, they wear a veil for the same kind of purpose. There is a purpose to that, and that's a sort of sensory deprivation. I mean, one of the things that happens with neurotransmitters is they don't just neurotransmitter mimics like psilocybin. They don't just falsely stimulate nerve endings. They also affect, because of the way the nervous system works, they also affect external sensory data that comes into the body. So I can definitely understand why he might recommend people do it in a darkened room to cut down on the sensory data, so that it's not too amplified. And that this is part of what the Mongolian shamans wear that veil for. It's the same kind of thing. But I think that, I mean, we could go into that in some detail, and I have a bit of understanding of what he's talking about there, I think. Though I'd need a reference, so I want to see exactly what he said. But the bottom line is there's all sorts of stuff we could talk about this, but I do think that hopefully I've explained that we're not, in our transition through shamanism, we're not really up to the point where we can talk about, in our, I'm talking about on the Woven Energy podcast, we're not really up to the point where we can properly talk about that, because we're at level 3 now, and we need to be at level 5 to talk about legitimate use of catalysts.
So in about 8 years, 10 years time then?
No, not at all, Joe. I'm sure you're going to be far more available from now on.
Oh, from now on, yeah. Well, just add a kid into the mix.
I didn't know what you wanted to say.
Oh, no, yeah. Everything's
awesome.
all good. That's awesome. A psychedelic experience, isn't it?
Joe has had a child. It's wonderful. I'm thrilled to bits.
Yeah.
He has
it's one of those moments in
a
life,
lot of fun to look
rung on the
forward
ladder, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what was your journey? What was your... Because obviously you've come to this understanding of what they do and all this through, I would imagine, plenty of experience yourself.
Sure.
How long did it take you to kind of really get to grips with what these things are and what they do?
Forever.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm
asking to try and help our listeners along their own path.
I think another thing that's important to add that I've said before and I haven't said on this episode is I believe it's possible to become a really powerful shaman without ever using any catalysts. I believe that's possible.
Yeah.
So I should have said that. In terms of how long, I think I'm still figuring it out, In terms of time scale, I became serious about my shamanism in the year 1985. And I've been doing it ever since. So I'm still learning, still figuring it out. I did have some help. Some great people helped me. I think, which we've mentioned before.
But you're at a stage now where, correct me if I'm wrong, you have no interest in these things. You don't feel like they would add to your personal experience of shamanism in the slightest.
I think because I've got quite good at that, because I specialise in spirit dance. I guess any shaman that specialises in something, could it help me if I was trying to do a different level 6? Achieve a different level pathway to level 6? Possibly it could, yeah. But because I'm like so, I've done spirit dance, since 1985, as my primary technique. I find no difficulty in knocking that block down, that block down to the child's toy car. I find no difficulty whatsoever. So why would I need a catalyst?
And it makes sense
pretty
because
easy to do.
They're not available all over the world. I mean, there's plenty of deeply shamanic places. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, and I could well be wrong here, but there's various parts of Mongolia where shamanism is rife, where they don't have these kind of substances.
There's no parts of Mongolia where they don't have any kind of substances, because any organic compound can be a catalyst of some sort in shamanic training. Remember, you're talking about strong hallucinogens, then that's true. There are places in the world where they don't have them. But anything can be used as a catalyst, and pretty much, you roll anything up, and put it in a pipe and smoke it, it'll have some kind of effect on you, no matter what it is. So there is no part of Mongolia where they don't have anything at all to stick in a pipe. Yeah, that doesn't.
So that lubricating aspect.
Yeah.
Is when you say you could roll up anything. Yeah. Do you mean literally anything, or has there got to be something in that compound to be able to aid in the process of slipping?
But there always will be. If it's organic material, there will always be a huge range of different compounds in there. Organic chemistry is incredibly complex, and there are always all sorts of things in there. And all you're looking for is something that puts you into a non-ordinary state. And I think that the people miss that with the focus on the positivity and the euphoria, the positive experience with these particular small range or relatively small range of plants and fungi. With that focus, people forget that there are other things that don't cause a positive state, a positive feeling, a feeling of well-being, that don't cause hallucination, that still have a fairly marked effect on your body. Now, let me give you an example that everybody should be familiar with. Sucrose. Sucrose has a huge effect on everybody, to the point where we're all sort of, in Western civilization, we are all heavy sucrose junkies. Vast majority of us are. And that has a tremendous effects on your body. And I know because of the few times I've managed to wean myself off the stuff for a while, you feel completely different. It's and a lot of virtually anything that's in our diet, it's all become normal to us now. Processed carbohydrates, refined carbohydrates, all that kind of stuff. Just a high level of carbohydrate in our diet. It's not natural, but it's something that we've become so used to that it seems natural. It seems like our normal state. So here's another way to think about it. You're probably, right now, as you're sitting listening to this, you're probably already under the effects of some plant toxin, some plant substance that is psychoactive in some way, that's having some effect on your nervous system.
I'm sat with a nice Belgian beer, so you're
yeah,
not
exactly.
wrong.
But I'm not talking about alcohol. I could just be talking about sugars, carbohydrates, all these different things, caffeine, all these things,
wheat juice
that are in our foods, all the E numbers, all that stuff.
Do you know? And isn't it interesting? How you have the quote unquote relatively harmless substances like psilocybin, like mescaline, like THC, and that can lock you up in prison for 10 years, and yet sugar is lined up in the Asda supermarket like cocaine.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's crackers. It's
quite
crackers, man.
It's quite interesting.
And putting shamanism aside, because it's just odd to me. It's odd.
And in terms of the effect that it has on you, the number of
it's gone. It's here, there, and gone. It's non-addictive. It's a positive.
Yeah, that's
thing.
not what I'm talking about. I mean, in terms of the effect that various substances have on you, and the number of fatalities that they cause in the world, everything pales into insignificance next to alcohol, which is perfectly legal.
And caffeine as well. I mean, I like a really good coffee, man. I've gone down the coffee rabbit hole, hook, line, and sinker. But caffeine as well. Sure, it just gives you energy.
But my point is, a lot of the stuff that we consume is not natural to us. Since we invented agriculture, we eat an awful lot of grain, which was not a big part of diet before we invented agriculture. So just any kind of carbohydrate, not just refined, but it's just not our natural diet, and that's going to have some kind of effect on us. But that effect seems normal because we've had it since
the
childhood.
amounts we eat now. I mean, there's carbohydrates in pretty much everything. There's carbohydrates in broccoli, right?
Yeah.
So we do eat it. It's just in the sheer quantities,
the volume
these days.
Yeah, and also the simplicity of the refined carbohydrates. Wheat, for instance,
white rice,
that type of stuff. It's in much higher proportion within our diet than it would have been when we were.
I was watching a documentary the other day, which was fascinating. They laid out a lot of ingredients, and they just had a relatively small bowl of rice, and they were putting sugar cubes next to each item. So they had like a donut, they had like a bagel or something. And the bagel got like 4 sugar cubes. They had various other things, but then they got to the rice, and she just kept laying the sugar cubes out. And it turns out in one small bowl of rice, there's like 20 cubes of sugar, the equivalent.
Yeah.
It is bonkers.
It's crazy, yeah. And the thing, a lot of those refined carbohydrates, like rice flour or wheat flour, they turn into sugar just about as soon as they hit your stomach. So it's quite interesting.
So anyway, I think we'll call it a day there. We're approaching the hour. I'm really sorry, guys, for this episode. I don't really know how else to put it. Just sorry. It's been fascinating. I've learnt loads from it. Like I said before, I mean, I've had my own experiences on them, both recreationally and what I would consider otherwise. But perhaps my experiences are more recreational than I perhaps would have liked to have thought. Maybe that's something for me to.
Yeah, but you're in good company, Joe.
Yeah, good company. I can always ring you up and, you know, as I have done a few times, go, Devon, I turned into a monkey. It was amazing. Joseph.
It was deeply significant. Yeah.
It was. What was your purpose?
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I think it's been one of those episodes that should be very valuable to people if they take the advice on board. I think it's inevitable, speaking realistically, that people are going to try this stuff. So my advice, please correct me, Damon, but my advice would be to try and put them in a box, and just, if you really do want to try this stuff, as I have done, and as Damon has done, and as a lot of people have done, go, is it recreational? In which case, do that and be happy doing that. If it's not recreational, you're trying something, then bear in mind that it might not be very helpful, or it might feel helpful, but it isn't, you know. Just put that experience and package it up and save it for a later analysis rather than think
so
that's
not my advice.
Something.
My advice is complete medical school before you pull out the scalpel and use it on somebody.
Yes, okay.
That's my advice.
All right, mate. Thanks ever so much. Guys, head to wovenenergy.com/start-here for your Get Started episode, where we do actually talk briefly about this stuff as well, but it's not in anywhere near as much as depth as this. But fascinating episode for you. If you go over there, check it out. Give us a review on iTunes. Every little bit helps. It helps us get discovered. You can give us a 5-star review as well if you deem us worthy. Thanks ever so much, and we will see you next episode. Damon, have you got anything to add before we finish?
Just thank you to all our patrons, and thank you to our regular listeners as well. You guys make this all worthwhile. The fact that you're listening to us, it's just brilliant. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, guys, and we'll see you next time.